Have you ever imagined living the life of your dreams with financial freedom and prosperity, but feel like something's holding you back? What if you discovered that the key to all this is already within you? Today, I'm going to tell you the story of David Miller, a man who, like many of us, found himself trapped in debt and financial constraints. But he didn't give in to fate. He discovered a surprising power, something that radically transformed his life: the law of attraction. David always dreamed of being rich, but he was constantly mired in debt. His financial reality seemed hopeless. However, by learning to change his mindset, using gratitude, visualization, and the power of positive thinking, David was able to turn things around. He not only emerged from the financial crisis, but also built an empire of prosperity. Stay with me until the end and discover how a simple mindset shift can transform your financial life forever. But first, if you haven't subscribed yet, click the subscribe button, activate the bell, and like this video, because David's journey could be the inspiration you need to change your reality too. David Miller has always been a man with big dreams. From a young age, he imagined himself at the top, with a financial empire within his reach. However, reality seemed to distort this vision. His debts, many of them from small, everyday purchases, accumulated silently but steadily. The weight of overdue bills was a ghost that haunted him every day, and hope seemed to slip through his fingers. He felt that the more he tried to escape this situation, the deeper he sank. But there was something in his heart that wouldn't go away, a burning desire for transformation. David knew there was something more, a life beyond the one he was living. How do ordinary people achieve great things? He wondered, amidst the financial chaos. His friends, his neighbors, those he knew seemed to have found the path to prosperity, but he found himself increasingly distant from it. It was as if financial success were a locked door, and he didn't have the key. As he navigated this sea of uncertainty, something shifted within him. A subtle but powerful idea began to emerge. What if I changed my mindset? What if the key wasn't to do more, but to believe more? He heard about a concept, almost mystical to him, the law of attraction, which asserted that the mind could be the key to transforming reality. To many, this seemed like a myth, but for David, it was like a glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel. It was then that he decided to start testing this idea. Skeptical as he was, something inside him told him he had to try. It wasn't easy, of course. As someone who had spent his entire life feeling like he was always running out of money, changing his mindset was more challenging than he imagined. But David began to dedicate himself to a new habit, to envisioning a future where debt was no longer a thing, where he was free to achieve whatever he desired. He didn't have many tools, but the hope of something better grew with every step, however small. At first, nothing seemed to change. The numbers in his bank accounts were still the same, and fear continued to knock on his door every morning. But the law of attraction wasn't about instant magic, and David knew it. He began to realize that by changing his mindset, he could begin to see the world differently. And who knows, perhaps, over time, his financial reality would change too. David Miller had always felt comfortable in his routine, but he didn't realize how his financial habits were ruining his chances of success. Debt began with small choices, those impulsive purchases, a coffee here, an outfit there, always postponing responsibility. Just one more time and I'll stop, he told himself, unaware that these words were creating a snowball that only grew bigger. He felt like he was being swallowed by a seemingly endless financial abyss. His monthly salary barely covered the bills, and each payment became a harrowing chore. David, in his ignorance, believed that financial life was like this for everyone. He had never been taught about personal finance, investing, or how to manage money wisely. The concept of saving sounded distant and complicated, something he could never understand, much less apply. He felt trapped in a cycle he couldn't break. In his conversations, David would hear friends and colleagues talk about how money always seemed to come their way. To him, this was pure luck. They must have been born with a silver spoon in their mouth. There's no other explanation. He believed that financial success was something destined for the few, while he, an ordinary worker, remained on the margins. Every time he thought about prosperity, anxiety took over, knowing his reality was far from it. His lack of financial knowledge became an invisible barrier in his life. He tried to learn from what he saw around him, but it always seemed like something was preventing him from understanding what was necessary to prosper. When he tried to grasp the more complex concepts of economics and finance, his mind would shut down, leaving him feeling increasingly confused and unmotivated. The fear of making bad decisions, of continuing in a spiral of debt, paralyzed him. However, something inside him began to question this limited vision. David no longer wanted to be held hostage by circumstances. He knew something had to change, but he also knew he couldn't keep repeating the same mistakes. There was something he needed to learn, a key he hadn't yet found. He just didn't know yet that the answer was beginning to appear before him, right in front of him. David's lack of financial literacy wasn't just an obstacle, it was a constant burden he carried without realizing it. He knew what it meant to pay his bills, but understanding the impact of his daily choices on his financial future was something he completely eluded. Each new payment felt like a never-ending cycle where he worked, paid off debt, and still felt like he was getting further and further away from what he truly desired. His financial future felt like an insurmountable wall, and he had no idea how to even begin to climb it. David's financial choices were guided by immediate need. He bought on credit, paid in installments, and believed that one day, somehow, things would work themselves out. But the reality was quite different. The more he tried to solve the problem, the deeper he sank. Each debt had a greater consequence, and the interest rates only added to the burden. David felt like he was chasing something he could never achieve. When he looked at his friends and family, he saw how their lack of financial knowledge was impacting not only their lives, but the lives of those around them. They, like him, were trapped in a cycle of spending more than they earned, unsure how to manage investments or savings. But worst of all was the feeling of helplessness in this situation. He wanted to get out of this, but didn't know where to begin. It was like being lost in the dark, groping without finding the way. Deep down, David knew that what was most holding him back from achieving prosperity was his mindset. He'd always believed money was something earned through hard work, but he'd never had a clear strategy. Finance courses seemed too complicated, and the advice he heard from successful people didn't always resonate with him. He was stuck in a scarcity mindset, unsure of how to change it, and unaware that the real key lay in something deeper, the way he thought about money. The feeling of frustration was constant. How could he change something he didn't fully understand? How could he prosper financially if he didn't even know what he was doing wrong? David felt like a fish out of water, but at the same time a small flame of hope began to ignite within him. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to break free from this cycle. And unbeknownst to him, he was about to discover the answer he'd been searching for. It was in a moment of utter exhaustion that David stumbled upon the idea of the law of attraction. He was browsing the internet, searching for answers to his stagnant financial situation, when he came across a video that discussed how the mind can influence reality. "What you think, you attract," the title said. At first he smiled skeptically, thinking it was just another one of those far-fetched concepts. But something about the video struck a chord, and he decided to keep watching. The idea seemed simple, almost magical. If he started focusing on his financial goals, visualizing success, he could somehow begin to attract it into his life. David was used to seeing money as something scarce, distant and nearly unattainable. The law of attraction, however, suggested he could change that. He would need to shift his mindset, his beliefs, and focus on what he wanted, not what he feared. It seemed too good to be true, but something inside him told him that perhaps this was the path he needed to follow. At first, David felt a bit lost. How could he simply visualize his financial freedom? He didn't even know where to begin, but he decided to try. Every morning after waking up, he would close his eyes and imagine a different life. He saw himself debt-free, with a healthy bank account, achieving his dreams and helping others do the same. The sense of freedom this visualization gave him was something he had never experienced before, and for a brief moment, he felt it could be possible. Over time, he noticed his mindset beginning to shift. He no longer woke up thinking about the bills he couldn't pay or the debts that plagued him. Instead, he spent his days focusing more on solutions, on opportunities that might arise. The idea that his mind could create the future he desired began to gain traction. But he was still at the beginning of his journey, and he knew that real change didn't happen overnight. Even though the path was uncertain, David felt a new energy taking over his life. He allowed himself to believe in what the law of attraction promised. That with persistence and faith, he could attract to himself what he so desperately desired. The journey was just beginning, and although the results weren't immediate, he knew that by changing his mindset, something was beginning to happen, and perhaps this was just the beginning of something much bigger. David didn't expect miracles overnight, but he could already feel something shifting within him. Upon waking each morning, he focused on the first things of the day, a silent thanksgiving for being alive, for having a new chance to begin again. It was a small ritual, but over time he realized he was beginning to feel a subtle difference. His thoughts, previously confused and filled with fear, began to focus on what he wanted to achieve, no longer on what was blocking him. At first, things weren't so dramatic. There were no big checks landing in his account or million-dollar opportunities knocking at his door. But David began to notice small changes. Instead of focusing on scarcity, he began to notice the opportunities around him. Ideas emerged to improve his situation, even to save a little more. And with each small change, he felt more confident, more in control of his financial life. Over time, he also began to practice something more profound, visualizing himself achieving his financial goals. It was an almost therapeutic experience. For a few minutes a day, he saw himself as someone who had already achieved his goals, someone who was living the life he'd always dreamed of. And most importantly, he allowed himself to feel that reality. He wasn't just thinking about the future, he was living it, feeling it, as if it were already part of his existence. But the real challenge began when doubts began to creep in. Will this really work? He wondered, sometimes feeling insecure. But instead of giving up, he chose to persist. David understood that change wasn't instantaneous, and that practicing the law of attraction required time and discipline. He began to affirm to himself every day that financial success was his birthright, and that I was ready to receive it. Every word, every positive thought became a small piece of the puzzle he was putting together. Soon, he found himself more open to new things. Things that had previously seemed impossible became possible. The fear that had previously consumed him about money and debt began to diminish. Now, he was more alert to opportunities, more willing to learn and grow. It was as if reality was slowly taking shape, and David was learning to be the architect of his own financial life. David's limiting beliefs were deeply ingrained in his life. He always believed that money was something distant, reserved for those already up there. This made him feel small and incapable, as if financial success were a timeline he couldn't access. "I'm not good enough to have a lot of money," he repeated to himself, unaware that these words created an invisible barrier between him and his goals. The human mind has the power to create reality, and David's beliefs were only reinforcing scarcity. He was raised in an environment where money seemed to be constantly scarce. His parents, though loving and hard-working, never achieved financial stability. For David, this became an absolute truth. Money was always seen as something elusive, and he grew up believing that, even with effort, wealth was beyond his reach. This thought pattern was an invisible prison, keeping him from any possibility of change. The first time he encountered this idea, he felt uneasy. How could he change his beliefs to change his life? It seemed too difficult. He knew he couldn't continue with this scarcity mindset, but letting go of the beliefs that had defined him for years wouldn't be easy. It was like trying to remove deep roots from a plant that had grown in fertile soil. But at the same time, David was tired of being a slave to these limiting ideas. And something inside him began to stir, a sense that there was something more waiting for him. Over time, David began to identify the limiting beliefs that were holding him back. Money is dirty. I don't have enough education to prosper. I'm not capable of managing large sums of money. All these phrases began to echo in his mind. He realized that change wouldn't come simply from visualizing success, but also from confronting and deconstructing these deeply ingrained beliefs. He needed to reprogram his mind, and to do so, he began challenging himself with every negative thought. He replaced these beliefs with affirmations of abundance. I deserve to be prosperous. I have the ability to achieve financial freedom. This new perspective didn't come instantly, but over time, David began to notice his thoughts shifting. He no longer felt so restricted by his limiting beliefs. With each step he took, he felt he was getting closer to his true self, the one who believed in infinite possibilities. And although the road was long, he was finally beginning to understand that true change wasn't in the outside world, but within himself. For David, gratitude was a word he'd never given enough importance to. It always sounded too simple, perhaps even cliché. But as he delved deeper into the law of attraction, he began to realize that gratitude was the key that could unlock a new level of abundance in his life. He learned that by being grateful for what he already had, he was creating a positive energy that connected him directly to prosperity. But how could he be grateful when he felt so lacking in his life? At first, gratitude seemed like a forced exercise. He would start his day trying to focus on the good things he had. But with his life full of debt and worries, this felt like a challenge. Yet, David persisted. Each morning, he would tell himself, I am grateful for my health, my family, my life, and all the opportunities that are coming my way. At first, his words were empty, lacking real emotion, but over time, he realized that this small act of gratitude made a big difference in his outlook. When David began practicing gratitude consistently, something curious happened. The little things began to shine in ways he'd never noticed before. The smile of a stranger on the street, the feeling of being able to give his mother a small gift, the simple fact of having enough to cover his daily needs. These small victories, which had previously gone unnoticed, began to have great meaning for him. Gratitude became a turning point, a way for David to reconnect with the present, shifting his focus from what he lacked. Gratitude also opened a channel for visualization. David found himself better able to envision a life of prosperity when he was already focused on the good things around him. He no longer waited to be grateful until major changes occurred. He learned to be grateful for the process, the journey, and even the challenges that helped him grow. Gradually, he realized that gratitude wasn't just about the things he had, but about recognizing the power he had within himself to transform his life. And so, gratitude became a fundamental pillar in David's journey. He no longer saw scarcity, but began to see abundance, even in the simplest details of life. Every little thing he was grateful for felt like a step toward his ultimate financial goal. It was as if, by giving thanks, he was laying the groundwork for what was to come. And as this happened, he felt something in his soul. Change was, indeed, beginning. David realized that real change didn't just come from what he did externally, but from how he began to see the world. His mind, previously dominated by financial doubts and fears, now began to adopt a new perspective. With each passing day, he felt calmer, more focused on what he wanted, and less anxious about what he didn't have. He began to realize that by replacing thoughts of scarcity with thoughts of abundance, he not only felt better, but also attracted more opportunities. One of the first mental transformations David noticed was his ability to see possibilities rather than obstacles. Before, he would see a financial problem and feel helpless, as if there were no solution. Now, he began to see solutions. Instead of drowning in worry, he took a step back and analyzed the situation more clearly. He understood that one's financial life was not just a reflection of hard work, but also of how one thought about money and opportunities. The practice of visualization began to become a daily routine for David. He would close his eyes and imagine a life free from debt, with financial freedom to do what he loved. He saw himself running successful businesses, helping others, and enjoying a life of abundance. The most surprising thing for him was that, as he visualized, he didn't just feel hopeful, he actually felt the thrill of already living this reality. This was the first real step in transforming his mind, not just imagining success, but believing it was already there, waiting to be experienced. Over time, David realized his mindset was shifting to one of prosperity. He no longer saw money as a villain or something difficult to achieve, but as a tool he could use to grow and help others. The limitations that had previously surrounded him began to dissolve, and he felt freer to make financial decisions with confidence. With each small victory, he felt closer to becoming the person he always wanted to be. Someone who creates and attracts prosperity. David still had much to learn, but now he felt the transformation was already underway. He knew the mindset shift was an ongoing process, but looking back, he could see how much had already changed. The law of attraction was doing more than just changing his finances. It was changing the way he viewed life and what he believed was possible for himself. And that, for him, was already a huge victory. Even with the shift in his mindset, David knew the journey was still far from easy. The difficulties didn't disappear simply because he was thinking positively. Reality still challenged him constantly. Although he felt more confident and hopeful, the pressure of debt didn't ease. He found himself in a dilemma. How could he continue to believe in his prosperity when the world seemed on the surface to remain so unforgiving? He knew that to truly transform his life, he would need more than a simple desire for change. The biggest challenge was undoubtedly internal resistance. Despite practicing the law of attraction, David would sometimes doubt himself. A person's financial life doesn't transform overnight, and he began to question whether he was truly capable of changing his reality. Is this even possible for me, he wondered, especially when the pressure continued to mount. These doubts, however small, were ever present, and David had to learn to face them and move forward, even when the path seemed fraught with obstacles. In his quest for prosperity, he also faced judgment from some around him. Some friends didn't understand what he was trying to do. They saw gratitude and visualization practices as esoteric and meaningless. There was constant pressure to return to the traditional way of thinking, to the lifestyle he'd always had, a regular job, paying the bills, and waiting for luck to knock. But David knew that to achieve something different, he would have to be different. He could no longer afford to follow the same old patterns that had kept him stuck. Financial hardships were still significant, but something within him had shifted. He no longer saw scarcity as an obstacle, but as a starting point. Difficulties were no longer a reflection of his inability, but an opportunity to grow, learn, and apply his new mindset. He understood that true change didn't occur because external circumstances changed, but because he, as a person, was changing internally. He began to see each challenge as a chance to test his new vision and his ability to attract what he desired. And so, even with the constant challenges, David pressed on. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but the difference was clear now. He was no longer alone in this struggle. He was arming his mind, his beliefs, and his actions so that each day, what seemed impossible became one step closer to the reality he envisioned. And even though difficulties persisted, he knew he was more prepared than ever to overcome them. David's shift in mindset wasn't limited to his thoughts on money, but began to influence every aspect of his life, especially his work. Previously, he was stuck in the routine of a regular job, where he felt undervalued and without prospect. But as his mindset shifted, David realized that work was actually a fertile ground for applying the principles he was learning. Instead of focusing on how much he hated his job or the limitations of his salary, he began to see opportunities for growth and learning. He became more proactive, more willing to take on responsibilities, and began to view his colleagues and superiors with a mindset of collaboration and gratitude, rather than competition. David no longer saw himself as a disposable asset, but as someone capable of adding value to everything he did. He allowed himself to believe that he deserved recognition and that he could achieve promotions or even new opportunities for growth. And surprisingly, the way his superiors viewed him also began to change. His work performance improved, and soon talks about promotions and raises began. What surprised David most was realizing how the simple act of changing his mindset, of seeing work as an opportunity rather than a burden, completely altered his productivity. He not only got more done in the same amount of time, but he did it with higher quality. He was more focused, more energized, and opportunities seemed to arise where he least expected them. Doors that had previously been closed began to open. He felt more confident, more capable, and more optimistic about his future at work. Furthermore, David began applying the principles of the law of attraction directly to his negotiations, whether for promotions or new projects. He imagined himself already achieving his professional goals, visualized conversations positively, and knew his actions were aligned with his goals. He believed so strongly in his potential that he began to excel in ways that previously seemed impossible. What had once seemed like a dead-end work environment now became a field of opportunities, and he was ready to seize them. David's work, once a place of frustration, was now a platform where he could grow and build the life he so desired. He learned that by changing his mindset about what he did, work became not just a source of income, but a powerful tool for personal and financial transformation. And without realizing it, he was creating the conditions for the financial freedom he'd always dreamed of, one victory at a time. Over time, David began to notice something surprising. New opportunities began to emerge where he had previously seen only limitations. As his mindset shifted, he found himself more receptive to ideas and possibilities he had previously overlooked. The law of attraction was indeed working, but not in the way he had imagined. It wasn't about waiting for opportunities to fall from the sky, but about being open and attentive to them, recognizing them as they appeared. David learned that prosperity wasn't just waiting for him in big events, but in the small, everyday opportunity. He began to take an interest in new projects and even investment ideas that previously seemed out of reach. The idea of starting something of his own, even if small, began to resonate. David discovered he had skills and passions he'd never considered, and he began researching how he could use them to generate additional income. Increasingly, he felt energized by the possibility of creating something new. The opportunities were no longer just big deals or promotions, but ideas and initiatives he could apply to his daily life. The most significant change came when David decided to invest in himself, seeking out courses and workshops on finance and entrepreneurship. He understood that to attract more opportunities, he needed to be prepared to seize them. By doing so, he expanded his vision and saw that the world was full of possibilities for those willing to learn and grow. Each new step brought him closer to the kind of life he wanted to build, and most importantly, he felt more secure and confident in his choices. Those around him began to notice the change as well. His co-workers, Friends, and even family noticed he was more motivated and optimistic. He began surrounding himself with positive-minded people who were willing to support his new projects and ideas. This made all the difference, as David began to surround himself with a circle of influencers who shared his values and aspirations. Every conversation, every interaction seemed like an opportunity to learn something new or even expand his network. David not only attracted financial opportunities, but also opened his mind to the possibility of creating and growing in various areas of his life. He no longer felt limited by a lack of resources or knowledge. He understood that by changing his mindset and opening himself to new things, he was, in fact, creating a life of prosperity. And for him, this was the true power of the law of attraction. Not just attracting good things, but being able to see the potential in opportunities and prepare to embrace them. As David delved deeper into practicing the law of attraction, he began to realize the importance of conscious decisions in his life. Previously, he made financial decisions based on fear, impulse, or an immediate need to solve a problem. These choices were often reactive, without considering the consequences. In the long run, however, now he began to act differently. Every decision, no matter how small, became an opportunity to affirm his new commitment to prosperity. David began to question his choices in a way he never had before. Instead of impulsively spending on things that didn't add real value to his life, he began to consider how that purchase or investment aligned with his long-term financial goal. He began to realize that every decision, whether regarding money or time, had a direct impact on his future. This realization completely transformed his approach to life. He no longer lived on autopilot, but took control of his destiny with greater clarity and confidence. When making decisions, he also visualized the results. Before making any significant purchase or important decision, he imagined himself experiencing the positive outcome of that choice. For example, when considering a new course or investment, he visualized the knowledge he would gain and how it would help him achieve his financial goals. This visualization process not only helped him make decisions more aligned with his desires, but also motivated him to take bolder, more confident actions. The most important thing was when David realized that his decisions didn't have to be perfect to be effective. He learned to trust the process and understand that not every choice would bear immediate fruit. The key was to move forward, making decisions based on what he knew was right for him in the moment. Self-confidence and mental clarity became powerful tools for him, and he now felt able to navigate life's uncertainties with much greater ease and purpose. Over time, David's conscious decisions began to accumulate in a positive, growing movement. Each right choice brought him closer to his goal of achieving financial freedom. He felt more aligned with his true essence, and his financial life began to reflect this new approach. With each decision, he was building not only his material wealth, but also his personal growth and confidence in the attraction process. After months of practicing the law of attraction and adjusting his mindset, David began to see tangible signs that his changes were paying off. His first major success came from where he least expected it. A small project he'd started without much confidence, but with the mindset that he should try something new. This project, which initially seemed like just a way to earn a little extra money, began to expand rapidly. The financial return wasn't astronomical, but it was enough to prove to David that he was on the right track. This success wasn't just financial, but emotional as well. He felt for the first time in control of his life, no longer a hostage to circumstance. As he looked at the project that was beginning to thrive, David realized that the true key lay in consistent action combined with a positive mindset. He had shifted his focus from scarcity to abundance, and as a result, the universe seemed to respond generously. Most interestingly, as he felt this positive impact, he became even more open to new ideas and approaches, knowing that if he could attract this success, he could attract much more. This first success was a turning point. David not only made money, but also gained something even more precious: confidence. He realized that the law of attraction wasn't just an abstract idea, but something concrete and applicable. He knew the road would be long and that victories wouldn't always be easy, but that small success reassured him that he was on the right path. He began to believe even more in his power of creation and visualization, and this motivated him to pursue his financial dreams even further. The impact of this success was also felt in his personal life. David began to feel lighter, more connected to himself and what he truly wanted for his life. He was not only attracting more financial opportunities, but also greater inner peace and happiness. He was more present in his relationships, more open to life's experiences, and more willing to help others find the same path of transformation. This first major success for David, though small at first, became the starting point for a series of achievements that would take him much further. He was not only changing his financial situation, but also his way of being in the world. The law of attraction was no longer a theory, but a daily practice he believed in wholeheartedly. And with each step he took, he knew he was closer to the abundant life he had always dreamed of. As the months passed, David began to see his financial life transform in unexpected ways. What had seemed like an endless cycle of debt and worry gave way to a steady stream of opportunities. He realized that by remaining focused on the abundance mindset and practicing the tools he learned from the law of attraction, he was creating a different reality. Change was no longer a distant possibility, but a reality in the making. The big turning point came when he received an offer for a new investment that initially seemed risky. David, with his new mindset, didn't hesitate. He trusted his intuition, applying what he'd learned about believing in himself and his choice. This investment not only yielded a significant financial return, but also opened doors to new connections and learning. He began to see that the universe was indeed conspiring in his favor, but he needed to be prepared to recognize and act when opportunities arose. This turnaround had a profound impact on David. He not only paid off his debts, but also began building a solid foundation for the future. What had seemed like a never-ending struggle now became a realm of possibility. He learned that the secret lay in aligning his actions with his beliefs, and that's how financial change happened. Gradually, with consistency and self-confidence, he began planning his future with a clear vision, knowing that success wasn't a matter of luck, but of choice and alignment. David also realized that his financial transformation wasn't just about acquiring money, but about changing his relationship with it. He began to see money as a tool to achieve greater freedom and help others, rather than as an end in itself. Each new financial gain was seen not only as a reflection of his efforts, but as a validation of his new way of thinking. He no longer saw himself as someone fighting against the tide, but as a creator of his own reality. This turnaround, though momentous, was only the beginning of a journey that David knew would have its ups and downs. But now, he was more prepared than ever to face the challenges ahead. He firmly believed that what had happened to him could happen to anyone willing to change their mindset and believe in the power of their own mind. David's life was transforming before his eyes, and he couldn't wait to see what the future held. With the success of his first major investment, David felt he was only scratching the surface of what he could achieve. He knew he couldn't stop there. The law of attraction, which he had previously practiced intuitively, began to be approached in a deeper and more structured way. David began to understand that true change lay not simply in visualizing his desires, but in constantly aligning himself with the energy of abundance. He delved deeper into the practice of meditation, prayer, and visualization, making them part of his daily routine. He used to dedicate moments of his day to connecting with his vision of the future, but now he did so with more intention. During these visualization sessions, he not only imagined what he wanted to achieve, but also felt as if he were already living that future. He felt the thrill of achievement, the joy of financial freedom, and gratitude for all he had already manifested. This alignment between thought and feeling became an essential part of his practice, creating a deeper connection between his mind and the reality he wanted to create. David also began to study the law of attraction further, seeking out books, courses, and people who shared his interests. He learned the importance of maintaining a positive mindset at all times, even in the face of challenges. He now understood that the law of attraction wasn't about magic, but rather a continuous practice of keeping one's thoughts and emotions aligned with what one desires. David knew that true prosperity required a daily practice of gratitude, positive thinking, and inspired action. Over time, the law of attraction ceased to be merely a tool for achieving material wealth and became a philosophy of life. David began applying the principles of attraction to various areas of his life: health, relationships, and emotional well-being. He understood that when the mind is aligned with the universal principles of abundance, blessings flow into all areas of life, not just financial ones. Prosperity for him came to mean a balanced life, where material success and inner peace coexist. Now more than ever, David lived with the confidence that the universe was always working in his favor. He understood that practicing the law of attraction was an ongoing process, and the more he dedicated himself to it, the more it flowed into his life. It was no longer about simply hoping for the best, but about acting with faith, gratitude, and the certainty that abundance was his natural birthright. And with that, he was ready for the next stages of his journey, with a renewed mindset and a heart full of gratitude. As David continued to practice the law of attraction more intensely and intentionally, he noticed that the world of opportunities seemed to expand before him. It was no longer just small investments or ventures that he was attracting, but large opportunity. He no longer saw himself as someone on the fringes of financial success, but as a true creator of his reality. And with this new mindset, he began building not just a financially stable life, but an empire of prosperity. The first major expansion occurred when David decided to invest in his own business. He had a talent for identifying market trends and knew he could apply his knowledge to a growing sector. Using the abundance mindset he had cultivated, he started his own business. It wasn't an easy decision, as it involved risks, but his confidence in himself and the law of attraction propelled him forward. He visualized his success, aligned his actions with his goals, and gradually saw his business grow and prosper. Over time, David expanded his investments into other areas. He didn't limit himself to a single field. He sought to diversify his assets, from real estate to technology investments. Every decision he made was aligned with his vision of abundance and financial freedom. He knew that true wealth wasn't just about accumulating money, but about using that money to create more opportunities and greater freedom. His empire wasn't just financial, but also emotional and spiritual, as he felt he was contributing to the well-being of others, both personally and professionally. The shift in his mindset also reflected a shift in how he related to money. Previously, he saw money as something scarce, something that needed to be earned at all costs. Now he saw it as a free-flowing energy, coming to him in response to his vibration of abundance. With this new perspective, he realized that money was no longer hindering his life, but rather facilitating his expansion and the realization of his dreams. As his financial empire grew, David also became a source of inspiration to others. He began sharing his story with friends and family, demonstrating how a mindset shift could transform any situation. His journey was no longer just about himself. Now he felt his mission was to help others understand and apply the same principles that helped him achieve financial freedom. He knew that by doing so, he would not only be expanding his empire, but also creating a legacy of prosperity for future generations. As David's financial empire expanded, he began to realize that success wasn't just about tangible results, but about staying connected to the process of creation. He knew that the ongoing practice of gratitude and visualization was the foundation of his lasting prosperity. Even amidst his success, David didn't abandon his daily practices of gratitude and visualization. On the contrary, he intensified these habits, understanding that gratitude not only attracted more abundance, but also strengthened his connection to the present. Each morning, David began his day with a gratitude practice, acknowledging all he had already achieved and all that lay ahead. He was grateful not only for the big victories, but for the small daily achievements. He knew that success was not a straight line, but a journey of ups and downs, and by being grateful for each part of that journey, he was creating a self-reinforcing cycle of abundance. Gratitude became a way for him to stay centered and aligned with the energy of prosperity, even in challenging times. Visualization, in turn, was an even more powerful tool in maintaining his lasting success. David knew that to further expand his financial empire, he needed to continue visualizing his ideal life. Each time he imagined himself reaching new milestones, he felt an intense emotion, as if he were already living that reality. He not only saw his financial prosperity, but also visualized inner peace, balance, and joy in his life. This practice not only reinforced his belief that he deserved it, but also prepared him to receive all that the universe had to offer. Over time, David realized that true wealth lay not only in what he had achieved materially, but in the inner growth he experienced. The impact of gratitude and visualizing was so profound that he felt more connected to his own life mission. He no longer saw money as an end in itself, but as a tool for living according to his deepest values and helping others achieve their own goals. This understanding transformed his relationship with prosperity and success. Today, David knows that the consistent practice of gratitude and visualization is the key to lasting success. He understands that true wealth lies in being grateful for what you have, while envisioning with faith what lies ahead. He realized that the law of attraction isn't just about attracting what you desire, but about consistently aligning yourself with the energies of abundance. And as he continues to apply these principles to his life, he feels more at peace, more fulfilled, and better prepared to face the challenges that lie ahead. David's true transformation wasn't just financial, but more importantly, internal. He went from seeing himself as a victim of circumstances to understanding that the life he lived was a result of the choices he made. Previously, he believed that money, luck, or destiny were beyond his control. But as the practice of the law of attraction deepened in his life, David realized that he was not a mere spectator, but the creator of his reality. This awakening was one of the most significant moments in his journey. David understood that by changing his mindset, he was transforming not only his financial life, but also his way of relating to the world. He no longer saw himself as someone being swept along by the waves of life, but as someone who could, in fact, influence his destiny, choosing how to react, how to position himself, and most importantly, how to act toward his goals. He was the captain of his own ship, and this empowered him in ways he never imagined possible. Realizing this, David began to look at his past financial struggles with a new perspective. Instead of seeing them as insurmountable obstacles, he saw them as valuable lessons that helped him grow. He no longer saw himself as a prisoner of debt or circumstances. Instead, he saw an opportunity to learn, to expand, and to use every experience, good or bad, as a stepping stone to success. He realized that being the creator of his life didn't mean he would never face challenges again, but that he now had the tools to deal with them more effectively. This internal shift was also reflected in his action. David began making bolder decisions, not because he was absolutely certain everything would work out, but because he believed in the process. He knew that even if things didn't go exactly as planned, he was still in control of how he reacted. Life wasn't happening for him, but through him, and this gave him a newfound power, a strength that propelled him forward. Now, looking back on his journey, David knew that his greatest transformation wasn't in his bank account or the number of investments he held. It was in how he saw himself in the world. He had become the creator of his reality, and that was the greatest treasure he could have ever achieved. He knew that his true wealth lay not just in money, but in the confidence he now had in himself and the certainty that, with the right mindset, he could achieve anything he set his mind to. The outcome of David's journey wasn't marked by a single moment of great success, but by a succession of small victories that together formed a life of true and sustainable abundance. He not only paid off his debts, but also built a financial empire based on solid principles of gratitude, visualization, and a positive mindset. His success, however, wasn't measured solely by the size of his bank account, but by inner peace and the freedom to choose how to live his life. David became a living example that change begins from the inside out. He realized that by changing his mindset, he was actually creating a new reality for himself. He became the creator of his life, shaping it with the choices he made, the thoughts he harbored, and the actions he took. The law of attraction was not just a tool for achieving financial wealth, but a life philosophy that taught him to believe in himself, trust the process, and act with faith. And looking back at that man who was overwhelmed with debt and directionless, David couldn't help but smile. He knew the path hadn't been easy, but every challenge, every moment of doubt was an opportunity for growth. His financial transformation journey was, above all, a journey of self-discovery and empowerment. He not only achieved financial freedom, but also reconnected with his true inner power. Now David feels profound gratitude for the life he created. He knows that to achieve true prosperity, it's necessary to cultivate an abundance mindset every day. He continues to practice gratitude, visualization, and faith in the process, knowing that each new step is a solid building block for an even brighter future. The law of attraction has become part of who he is, and he continues to share his story, knowing it can inspire others or take control of their own lives and create the prosperity they deserve. The greatest lesson David carries on his journey is that true wealth lies not only in what you possess, but in what you believe is possible for yourself. He knew that the secret to a life of abundance lay in aligning with the energy of the universe, trusting in your ability to create, and, above all, acting with a heart full of gratitude and faith. David Miller is no longer the man who felt powerless in the face of debt and financial fear. He has become a creator of his own reality, someone who, through a shift in mindset and daily practice of the law of attraction, has achieved the prosperity he so desired. He not only overcame his financial difficulties, but also discovered the power of believing in himself and aligning with the universe in a deep and true way. The biggest lesson from David's story is simple yet powerful. You don't have to wait to succeed. You can start now by changing the way you see the world and how you relate to money. True prosperity begins in the mind and heart, and by aligning your thoughts, actions, and emotions, you can achieve any goal you desire. So, what are you waiting for to begin your transformation journey? Remember, the power to change your financial life is in your hand. If you enjoyed this story and want to continue learning how to use the law of attraction to achieve your goals, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share this video with someone who also needs to hear this message. See you in the next video, and until then, keep believing in your potential and creating the life you deserve.